Hello Flosstube, my name is Deb. I am the Traveling Stocking Stitcher. When people hear I do stockings, they're like, I could never do a stocking, or I would never do a stocking, or that's, I don't know, they're very intimidating. And I would hope to take a little bit of the fear out of that, because maybe it's because you don't do machine stitching, as I don't have to. Maybe it's because you don't know how to go about putting on the backing. Maybe it's because you think stockings are full coverage. They don't have to be. Sometimes they are. This one that I'm going to show you has not a whole lot of stitching on it, so it's not like you have to stitch like a full coverage kind of thing. You know, pick the design you like that doesn't require a lot of stitching. Or I think it's because you have to cut into the thing that you've just done hours and hours and hours of work on. And I'm going to show you how you can adjust it a little bit, that it's not always final, that, you know, if you make a mistake, there's ways to correct it. So as long as you don't cut too much off at the first part, just be generous. If you're intimidated by machine stocking sewing, you don't have to do that. If you watch it and then you pick up the courage and do your own stocking, I would love to hear about it. So please leave some comments about it. I would love to know about that. This is a stocking I did in honor of Henry Wadsworth Longfellow and his family, and he was the one that wrote the words to I Heard the Bells on Christmas Day. So that we're going to back this stocking. I start off by making sure I've ironed everything very thoroughly. The backing of the fabric is ironed up, as well as the back. And if you have beads, you know, sometimes I'll even use a steamer on it. I've gone ahead and I've done my ironing, but you want to make sure that it's got all the creases out, because you won't be able to do that as easily later on. The other thing I like to do is trim off little stray strands here that I'll just trim those up a little bit and get those out of there so that I don't see them on the back as much. So little leftover threads. Especially this is a very light linen, and so it's going to show through. Especially these black threads are going to show through, so try to trim them as much as possible. And sometimes you can even, when you're pressing them out, you can press them so that they don't stick out over the loose fabric, but they stick out, or you can iron them and plate into the design, as opposed to having them stick out randomly. So like here's a spot where I might want to try to push those stray strands out of the way. I've never done anything with interfacing. Some people have done backing. Again, this is a very light linen, and this might be a good candidate for it, but I'm not going to use that for this. Now what I've also done is, because I was making this, this is not designed as a stocking. I was kind of making it up as I go. I had this square here, and then I decided to add the words down below, and then on the toe I put this bell. And so I had originally basted around the edge. I took another stocking, a template of a stocking, and kind of basted around where I thought the edge would be so that I knew where to place things. And actually that's not too bad. I think maybe I'll bring it just up a little bit closer around the foot. But I think I will use this basting line that I put in here as my template. And I also got my backing fabric has been pressed. Normally I use felt. This is not felt, so this is a little bit of a new experience for me. I do see that there is a sort of a pattern in the fabric I'm choosing to use, so I'm going to try to center that up. It seems to have kind of a central thing, so I think if I center it up, felt is much more forgiving, and really nobody sees the back of it, but I had this remnant of, I think it's like upholstery fabric that I found somewhere, and I kind of like it. So I'm going to use that. I'm going to try to center it up amongst this, and because I'm using a fabric with a pattern rather than felt, it's going to be more important to cut it out right. Normally when I use felt, I don't care whether I'm wrong side or right side, because both sides of the felt look the same. But I'm going to flip this over instead. I want my right sides together to figure out where I'm going to make the edge of my stuff. So based on this curve here, and sometimes I'll even, you know, nobody's going to see it, and I'm going to you know, sew around it. This is on the inside. I can even use a pencil to kind of, whoops, I'll move that up here a little bit so you can see. Like I said, I'm going to move this think I'm going to cut out a little of this edge here, so I'm going to just use my pencil here to shape it a little bit more of how I want it to go, and I'll follow that. And that'll be on the inside, no one will see it, and I'm going to be sewing inside the line there anyway, so that'll get, you know, all this stuff will be cut off. And I think I'll come around this a little bit tighter here and do that. Alright, so now the scary part comes, where you actually cut your piece. You've done a lot of work on it, now you're going to take a scissor to it, which I think is what freaks most people out about doing stockings. So here we go. I'm just going to go along the outside, and I can, you know, be a little more generous if I'm a little concerned about the fact that I'm cutting into something. Give yourself, you know, you can always cut it off later. You can't add more back on, but you can be pretty generous on your margins. I should be cutting from the back where I just did my drawing, didn't I? And I also leave space on the top because I'm going to fold it over here a couple of times, so you want to leave a longer piece on the top. So now that I've got that piece cut out, now I'm going to use this just as my template for cutting out the other fabric. So because I'm trying to get this in the middle, typically I would just go closer to the edge and cut it that way. Because I'm trying to center this up towards the middle though, I'm going to have to do it a little bit differently. Okay, so I'm going to pin this and cut them. So I've got my right sides together, so when I turn it inside out, these will be facing outward. For right now, we're going to pin them together. Okay, I've got the fabric pinned in here. I've got it pretty well centered up, I think, where I want it to be. So now I'm going to cut around here. Okay, so now I have my back and my front cut out and placed together, wrong side out, right sides in. What I'm going to do next then is decide how much space I want to have on the top, and I'm going to fold it over and press it down so it matches this. And so one of the benefits of having cross-stitch fabric is you kind of see, it's a little easier with Aida. This happens to be linen, so, and it's a smaller count. I think this is a 28 count that I'm using, so it's a little harder to get your lines straighter, but you can see a little bit. I turn it this way so it's closer to me and I can see the edges. So again, I just more or less eyeball this and decide how I want it to look. If you wanted to pin it down and make sure that it's, when you press it, it's staying the way you want it to be. Once you press it a little bit, you can start to see, okay, maybe I could have gotten a little rolled down a little more. So I'm going to adjust that a little bit and just press it again. And that looks a little bit more even to me. So I've got one fold, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to fold this in half and then half again. So I'm just going to fold this under and then fold that like that and press it one more time. And again, if you wanted to pin it in place, but I think I can just press this as I go here. Okay, so that's going to kind of be my hem across the top. Now I need to do the same thing with the backing piece. I'm just going to fold this over to match that and iron it down. My first fold, and then I come back and fold that in half and then fold it back over again and repress it again. So I've got a finished outside that will appear on the inside of it. So when you first, when you look at the top, it'll look like a finished fabric. Alright, so now I can go ahead and put my pins back in. Pin this so that stays a little more flat, and then same thing over here. Now I'll put one in the middle for right now, and I'm only going to put it through this edge and one on this edge, because I don't want to sew those together, obviously, or I won't be able to get any goodies in my stocking. Alright, done cutting it out. Time to get out the needle and thread. Now I'm going to start sewing it, and I just use DMC floss. So I've got a couple of choices here. I usually try to match it to the backing fabric. It doesn't show through to the front, so the backing fabric tends to be. So I probably could use either one of these. I think I'm going to go with 372 here, and that's what I'm going to use. So I just take a double strand, and take a fairly long piece here. I'm going to just double it up, put it on my needle, tie a knot. I usually put 2 or 3 knots in here just to, because this is fairly thin linen, I don't want it to pull through. But I usually will anchor the knots on the backing fabric anyway. I wouldn't put one more in here just to make sure. Okay, so I've got a length of floss here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the backing fabric. And what I want to do is figure out where my edge is going to be, because I want to stay inside the edge. So I'm going to go a little bit further inside. So I'm going to pull up underneath the folded under piece and make sure I'm inside where the edge is going to be. I'll go in even a little bit further and do that because I just want to get this tacked down. So I'll pull it up so the knot goes underneath this folded over piece. And then I'll take a longer stitch here and go through. I'll unhook this for right now and fold that back down a little bit. It's not in my way. And then I'll take a tiny little stitch here because this is the back that's going to be visible. So I want to make a small stitch here and then take a wider stitch underneath and come back up. And I'm just going to go along the top of this edge here. And again, a little tiny stitch and a longer stitch behind. Trying to keep it as straight as possible on the back with longer stitches. You know, the truth is, if you mess up, nobody really sees the back of your stockings anyway. I used to, spend time thinking about what's the fabric, what's the right kind of fabric, and then I don't even look at the back of my stockings. So it really doesn't matter too much if you mess this up. Okay, so now I've stitched little tiny stitches, and because of this fabric, you can't even see where those little stitches are. And the back side, it's relatively straight line across here. And I'm going to stop again just inside where the edge of the stocking is. It'll be tacked down over here. So, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave this for right now because this is the backing. I'm going to keep using this thread instead of having to start over. So I'm going to come back through the back side and set that aside. I'm going to do the same thing to this top fabric. For this one I am going to use a color that's closer to the linen color. So 712 looks like a good choice. The only piece I'm going to use is this, so I don't need it to be as long. Do the same thing, take a section, double it up, put my needle, and put a knot or 2 in it. Or a knot or 4 in it. I usually put 4 knots in it, I think. Again, because this is a very thin weave, I am a little bit concerned about the knot pulling through on this. And it'll be underneath, so nobody will see the big old huge knot. No one will know, including myself, once I'm done where the knot is. Okay, so now I want to take the top piece and lift up just that fold that I did, so I'm on the inside of the fold, and just be inside where I want to be, inside the where the seam is going to be. And you want to, doesn't matter too much, but probably middle to the bottom without getting too far to the edge. I'll just come through there. Now that knot's concealed under there, nobody's going to see that. Move up here so you can see a little better. And so I'm going to just kind of do the same thing. Remember, this is the back, so I'm going to take my long stitch here, and then there's my top stitch. So this one you want to just go over like one thread, one strand. This is where you want to be a little closer in terms of the color, because this will be seen a little bit. If you can arrange it, if I've got like a long name here where I could hide it, this is all just, you know, backstitch names, so I don't have a lot of things that I can bury this behind. But sometimes if you have a long name or a pattern or something, if you use the same color of whatever's behind it, these strands will pretty much disappear. So take a little stitch, a longer stitch in back, and again, you really can't see those. You gotta be looking for little stitch, long stitch in back, and just keep going along in as straight a line as you possibly can. And you can get these pretty even, again, because you've got the lines in the fabric, the weave of the fabric, although like I say, the linen gets a little more difficult to follow the path. And here's when I could see this bleeding through. I could see this little strand. Let me make sure that I clip that guy out. I see another one here that I'm seeing shine through. I maybe might want to consider, with real thin linen, doing an interfacing, but I haven't done that before. And once it hangs, it's not like it's lying flat against something, so I don't know that that is that critical. You're not going to see a lot of those loose strands hanging out. Okay, so I've stitched all the way across there. You can barely see those little tiny stitches in the front. Along the back, I'll try to keep it as straight as possible. And again, I'm going to end just inside where I want it to be a little bit. So I'm going to pull it back through here and go under. This one I am going to tie off, so I'm actually going to not pull it through both pieces of fabric, just the first layer of fabric, so that I can tie the knot inside here. Spin it a little bit so I can get a better angle on it. Do a couple more knots just to make sure it's tight. And again, especially if these are decorative, you're not filling them, it's probably not as important to be as sturdy, but and again, I don't typically line my stockings because they're decorative, people aren't looking inside of them. So I've got a healthy knot there. I'll just clip this here. That's done. Alright, so now I've got a finished edge here and a finished edge there. And once I do this, sometimes it needs a little bit of adjustment. Just want to make sure that they're both about the same. Okay, I haven't gotten one higher than the other. If I did, I would just pull this down a little bit further. You know, you may want to leave a little extra material on the bottom. But here it is. They look even across the top. And I should be good to go. Alright, so I'm going to go put my pins back in that I took out to be able to manage this up here. And you remember I left this thread hanging out the back here because I'm real lazy and I don't feel like re-knotting things. I hate tying knots and things. If cross-stitching required you to tie knots, I would not be doing it for a hobby. So I left off here, and I want to get to where I'm going to make my edge going down here. So here's my border. I'm going to go just a little bit further. And I left off just a little bit shy of where I should have been. So I'll put one more stitch in here at least until I get to where I want that edge to be. Okay, so here we are, and I'm going to be on right along the inside edge here. The most important stitching are these two edges right up here, because this is where you want it to be tight and reinforced. So I will go through this and make sure that it's pretty sturdy here. So I'll just go back and forth. Go down a little ways, and I'll come up a little ways, making sure I look at the back and the front, and making sure they're straight lines. Come back up. I am just using the same needle I would use to cross stitch, which is probably a horrible thing to do, but it's never been a problem for me. Alright, when I get to the top here, again, I just want to make sure that I've pretty well reinforced this spot. And the same thing here, when I get to the edge of this, I want to make sure that I've got that pretty tight going over the piece here. So I'll go back and forth a little bit on this section where the fabric is rolled over. Okay, that looks pretty good. So now I'm just going to start stitching like this. So I put my thread in above, or I put my needle in above the thread, and then go down a little bit and come back out on the other side of the thread. Hopefully my hands are not in the way. So again, go back behind and come out. I'm sure there's a name for it. I don't know what the stitch name is. And what I will do is I will go twice around this. I will go around this way doing this stitch all the way around, and then I will flip it over and do it all the way around the same thing. So I'll show you what I'm doing. I'll just do a few more here, and then I will come back when this is all done and show you my second round. So back and forth, a couple more in here following my line. So you can see here the stitches, a little harder to see, but these are more a straight stitch here, and these are a little more gappy. Okay, I've gone a little bit farther and I'm running out of thread here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my needle through so it comes out the back, pull it through, and then I'm going to put my knot here because I think this is more secure. The backing fabric is usually not as flimsy as the cross stitch fabric. So I'm going to put my knot here, and again I'm going to put several in just to make sure it holds. Alright, I've loaded up my needle with another strand of floss, put a big old knot in the end, and I'm going to go in from the back side because I want the knot to be all on the backing side. And just keep on going then. Take a little bit up here. A running stitch, maybe that's what this is called. It's coming to me, I don't know. If you know, you can put it in the comments and educate me. Okay, so I'll keep going. I'll let you know when I'm done, and I'll show you what I do next. One other thing I do want to show you before I get around to my second pass is when you're coming around the corner here, it can be a little tricky to get your curves looking just right. So if a stitch goes in crooked, don't hesitate to say, you know what, I don't know that it matters all that much, but you want to make it as rounded as possible. Of course, I'm not messing it up here. I want to mess it up a little bit. But let's say I go like this, and it's I don't know if you can see that real well, but it's going here, and then it's starting to point that way. I'm going to back this out just a little bit and try to keep this as straight as possible. So take your time. If you need to pull out a stitch, it's not a difficult thing to do that, but especially around the curves, and even on the straightaways, you want those as straight as possible as well. So just thought I would mention that too. Okay, so I finished stitching all the way around the perimeter here, and I drew on little lines here, and I started looking I was eyeballing this and I wanted to make sure things were about the same distance over here. So hopefully I got them close enough. So like I say, if they give you a pattern, that's usually the best way to do it. Follow their pattern. Because this was not intended to be a stocking, kind of had to draw my own design or the edging of it. So I've got it all around, and I haven't finished, I haven't knotted this off. I did go back and forth on this side too and make sure I was, did a couple of rows of stitching back and forth up there across the top there where it's going to take the most stress. And now I'm just going to go do the opposite. I'm going to go start out here on the back, and I'm going to go back behind this last stitch and go forward. And I'm going to check on the other side to make sure I'm still aligned there. And pull it through. And then go back behind that stitch and come forward again. And yep, I'm still in a row there. You can see it's still lined up. Pull that through and go down and back. And so I just go back all the way around again. I'll do a couple more stitches and you can see what's different. Because on the back here you see this is almost a continuous running line of things, where on the front I had these intermittent stitches. So I'm just doing the opposite to give it a little more stability and sturdiness. So if I pull this through, you'll be able to see on this side. So now I've got that steady band, and here it's a little harder to see because of the pattern and because I already have that set of stitches in there. But I'm going to have a steady row along here, and I think that gives us a little more strength to the stocking. Felt is another benefit of using felt is it gives it a little more strength, particularly using linen. That's why Aida is also, like a 14-count Aida gives you enough heft. Otherwise the stockings tend to collapse on themselves. So that's what I'm going to do, is go around, and I'll have you join me again when I get to the point that I have this stitched around the other direction. I've done my first pass doing the stitches around the one side, and then I've done my second pass, flipped it over, and stitched the other way. So it's kind of like on a sewing machine where you've got the top and the bottom stitch. This is interlocking, so it gives it a little more security. So that's the reason I go around twice. And they don't have to be really tiny stitches. You saw the size of stitches I was doing. It would take me all day if I made little tiny ones. And quite honestly, I made these 30 years ago for when my nieces and nephews were pretty young. And they've held up. I don't know that there's been any problems of them splitting or having issues or anything like that. So, little kids are pretty rough with their stockings when they want to get the goods out of them. So, I've had no issues at all. So what I'm going to do is I finished here. I'm not going to go back up and do, because I did several passes up here on my first time down. So I'm going to stop it right back here and tie my knot in here to finish this off. I've been around all the ways. Now this one is a little different because it's not a full coverage. Actually, full coverage are a little easier to back in the sense that you know where the boundaries are. And what I usually do on that is stitch right in between the first stitch on the edge and the second stitch in. So you're not going to lose a ton of detail if you do that. I just don't want any of the fabric, the bare fabric, to show through. But when I do stitch a full coverage piece, I'll flip this over in a second and show you. Like if I were stitching here, I would stitch right along this, so I would be in between that row there. I mean, obviously you wouldn't have back stitching typically on the edge, but that's how I would line that up. So I've got this here, and one other thing, as you can see, I left wide margins. I'm going to turn this inside out, and if I decide I don't like it, I can always come back in if I really, really wanted to and get a little bit closer. But let's just take a look and see how it looks and see if I'm happy with the appearance of it. People are afraid of doing stockings, and really you do have some control over how things are going to look. So, and you can, it's not unrecoverable. You can fix things. Poke the holes out here and just make sure it looks all right. Before, I'm not going to go real in depth. I just want to make sure it looks well, because I'll turn it back inside out again and do some clipping of the edges. because I have some pretty wide edges here, but I just want to make sure I'm happy with how the overall look of the shape is. Yeah, I think that's not too bad. So it looks fairly even on the edges. If I pull this out, they're going to be pretty even. So turn it back inside out again. And time to trim off all this excess here. This side it's a little easier to see. So just start cutting. And I would leave, you know, not a real wide margin, but you want to leave maybe 1/4 of an inch. And I had basted around here, and I'm just going to keep cutting here. It's going to be fine. I'm not going to bother taking that all out. I'm just going to cut it off. The basting was just done to give me a feel for where I thought the edge was going to be. Make sure I'm not getting too close to the edges on the back. When I'm stitching up in these top corners up here, when I mentioned you want to go back and forth a couple times, this particular fabric, even though it is kind of an upholstery fabric, it's not very thick, the backing that I've chosen. But when you do have felt and you fold it over multiple times, it can be a little thick. You're going to maybe want a thimble or something to help you push that needle through the several folds and the fabric. If you're using like an Ada or something, it's going to give your fingers a little workout. Okay, so I've got it all trimmed up around the edges. Now you do want to cut in, you don't want to be careful, you don't want to cut through the thing, but you just want to cut around here. This will allow it, just cut a little bit of to allow the corners to do a little bit of turning. A little bit of close here. Closer than I would have liked to have been. All the way around the rounded edges. Just put a little bit of notching in here. And some people actually take notches out. I haven't really done that. I just do the... Let's see if I can put a notch in here and show you. Some people do an actual notch like that. But usually this does the trick. If you find it's not doing a great job of turning inside out, still have a lot of gapping, notching can be done. So those are all the edges. That's probably good enough. So here we go. I'm going to turn it inside out. And you can either just push this out with your fingers, or take a pencil or something. Whoops. And poke it through. You don't want to poke it with the sharp end, but you have fancy tools you can use. I just find my finger is usually good enough to work out these corners, round them off here. Not too bad. I might work on this a little bit more to get a little more of those curves out here, but for the most part you get the idea. Now the last thing that I typically do is, I'm not a real big fan of the big chunky fabric hangers that people use. I kind of like to have the illusion of them floating in air, sort of. So what I typically do is use either like a gold cord or some sort. I found this is kind of goes well with this, I think. This is a pearl cotton kind of thing. It looks like it's pebbly pearl. It looks like it's from Rainbow Gallery, and so I've got this in my stash. What I typically will do is just take a piece, off a piece. I will tie it in kind of a slip knot about the length that I want to be able to hook it around. You want to not make it too small so that it doesn't fit over any hooks, but you also don't want to make it so long that it's going to hang down too far. So you just want to put a slip knot in there, make sure it's not going to pull through. It's pretty tight. And then what I typically do will just kind of go in here and I will sew it back and forth along here, along the inside seam. Because it's really thick, I'm going to just put one strand through. Put it right in where the edge is and pull it up right on the seam. So I'm not coming out the front necessarily. And okay, so the knot is right below the surface here. So it's going to be about that long. And here's the other leg of this. I'm just going to put that here and kind of weave it around. So I'm going to pull that tight. And I'm just going to go back and forth on the seam, or what do you call it, on the seam, just without going between the, stitching into the front or stitching into back fabric that shows, because I don't want the knot to show. So do that, and so I'm going to try to also hook this other leg underneath here. Alright, I've zoomed in a little bit. Hopefully you can see this. I'm just trying to tie. Here's a tip. Leave a long enough string so you don't have to work so hard to tie knots and things. Alright, I think that's pretty good. So, we're not going to see it. We're just going to see the string hanging out. If you wanted to put, you could certainly, at this point, I could put some trim around the top. I've done that before. It gets a little difficult when you're trying to finish it off. I've never been real good about tucking the ends in and stuff, but I tend to not do that anymore if I don't have to. So zoom back a little bit so you can see. Oops, wrong direction. So we can see there is the entire stocking, all finished. Now this one is done on linen, and I had wished, well, this is why I usually do 8 up, because linen is just, when I hang it, it just wants to collapse. I've had to put a magazine in here just to get it to not just crumple up into a ball when I hang it up, but it still, when I hang it, it still wants to kind of fold and leaves a big crease in it. So if you're going to use linen, at least put some interfacing probably on the back of it to give it a little more stability. Thanks for joining me. Bye.